Okay, things you didn't know about the male gender, the Y chromosome. For one thing, actually not the smallest chromosome. It's actually in pretty good company. Of course, that's how they are set up. That's not how they look like inside the cell. Also, larger chromosomes can take more energy to transcribe genes and take more time dividing and replicating. So, if it's not necessary for the male role, of course it would be selected out.
Spoiler alert. Turns out the Y chromosome is just as weird as we always thought it was.
What did we think it was? How did we think of it before? Think of it before. Let's see some of the rhetoric around.
Lisa, honey, wake up. Why bother? Because your father has a big surprise for you. I'm adopted? Yeah, come look.
Lisa, it's me, Daddy, your father. I rounded up every Simpson in the Tri-City area, so I can prove to you there's nothing wrong with the Simpson gene. This is your great-uncle Chad. Go ahead, Chad. Tell her what you do. I run an unsuccessful shrimp company. Oh, but you run it, right? Oh, yeah. Okay, this is your second cousin Stanley.
Oh, I shoot birds at the airport.
It's bunked in its own universe.
Right?
But this is before the car, their dealer brother, his half brother.
I play a millionaire at parties. At least I like to.
You probably should have researched this first, Dad?
What about his half brother who runs the car company?
What about you? Well, sir, I step in front of cars and choose a driver. I beg celebrities for money.
I'm a prison snitch.
Jug band manager. My legs hurt. He says,
What about our $5?
you get it after you leave. Now get out of here.
Homer, you didn't ask everybody. What about the women?
Fine. What do you do, Dr. Simpson?
Doctor?
That's right. I'm Chief of Complicated Surgery at the Invasive Care Clinic.
You have to if you want to be an architect.
Or an environmental lawyer. Or a regional sales coordinator for the third largest distributor of bunk and trundle beds.
Oh, did you hear that, Lisa? So, all the Simpson women turn out okay.
That's right, sweetie. The defective Simpson gene is on the Y chromosome, so only men are...
Means random mutations can't get passed down to any other chromosomes, especially can't get passed down to the X chromosome.
With us. I first of all start by apologizing for not posting consistent videos. Now this is because I'm a science school and I just came back from science school 1 week ago and I had a lot of board exam preparations. So due to the lack of time, I was here and I had a lot of board exam preparations. So due to the lack of time, I wasn't able to upload any of the videos. But here I am back in Twitter with a about the Y chromosome fading away and how the male population of the human beings will go extinct sooner or later. Right, the Y chromosome, which is actually a very big factor of what the gender will be of a baby, is slowly fading away. Well, just for some context, I'll tell you what happens. You see, there is XX chromosome and XY chromosome. That just means that it's of the female gender and XY the male gender. Now you see, this Y chromosome and the X chromosome will be given by the male, which is the Y chromosome is fading away. You see, the Y chromosome, which actually states that gender is male. You see, what is happening here? The Y chromosome is slowly getting degraded over time. You see, we have almost lost up to 91 or 92% of our original DNA due to this degradation. And what happens when the Y chromosome degrades? Well, you see, when the Y chromosome degrades, it means that the male generations will slowly also get degraded. Now, this is due to multiple reasons, but
really what anyone expected. The complete sequence of human Y chromosome revealed that it's just weird. No better word to describe it. But not like alien weird or like, oh my god, biology is wrong weird. More like it just doesn't really make sense in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different structures. But anyway, hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and today we're going to be discussing some of the new discoveries about the Y chromosome, and also discuss another study in regards to animals that have lost their Y chromosome, and in some sense are still surviving just fine. And so we're also going to try to answer the question of, are humans losing Y chromosome, and what's going to happen to humans when there is no Y left around? And so let's discuss this in a little bit more detail, but I guess let's start with the obvious. Human Genome Project, even though it's technically finished, is not finished. Despite a lot of different mapping that's already taken place, and despite solid understanding of what's happening in our genes, there are still a lot of secrets left here, and still a lot of unanswered questions, including questions about junk DNA. Now that's something we'll talk about in some of the other videos, but there are still some things here that we still do not understand.
Non-coding DNA. They don't work on proteins. They create RNA that affect other chromosomes.
And so even though a few
No,
years
it's
ago
not.
in the video in the description,
It's not
I
the smallest
discussed
of
some
them
of the
all.
recent details and some of the recent discoveries about the Human Genome Project, it took a few more years and additional techniques to finally finish everything, including the Y chromosome. The chromosome that, unlike other chromosomes, doesn't actually contain that many genes. Its main purpose is to determine birth sex in humans and other similar mammals. And so if the embryo acquires X and Y chromosomes, it technically becomes male because it contains a trigger known as SRY gene, sex-determining region Y protein, that sort of looks like this, that's responsible for switching on so-called male genes on other chromosomes. One of the most important one is known as SOX9 gene, the gene responsible for the development of testes. But this can be activated by other genes in other animals, and so technically this particular protein is not really required, but it seems to be pretty efficient, and that's why the Y chromosome became sort of the feature a lot of different mammals acquired. Although none of this seemed to have existed approximately 150 million years ago. Back then, X and Y were just ordinary chromosomes, the way they are today in, for example, birds. Birds don't have the same sex chromosomes as us, and there used to be two copies of the Y chromosome that contained approximately 1,000 genes as well. But it's believed that around this time, this is when SRI gene evolved, and that's when this protein became extremely efficient at activating sex genes. And at this point, the Y chromosome started to change quite dramatically. Various types of mutations led to a dramatic change of Y chromosomes, making them degenerate really fast, losing approximately 10% of all active genes per million years, basically reducing the number from approximately
Less
1,000
cancer
active
genes.
to just 27. Here's roughly what it looks like now compared to the X
It's like the
chromosome.
top of
And
it,
because
the
of this
bottom.
dramatic loss of genes, it was always assumed that eventually we might actually lose Y chromosome completely. I mean, obviously it has the genes required to make sperm, and even some genes critical for life.
Actually, it's main, most of the genes are to make sperm.
Smaller genes exist on the X chromosome as well. Just for the moment, Y
Not the sperm
seems
genes.
to do a pretty good job. But one of the main reasons it was
Not
so
the
difficult to actually try to read this chromosome, or to try to map it, is the fact that it's basically full of junk DNA. Nevertheless, the new study managed to sequence most
unrecognized
of it, uncovering
DNA.
that it tends to contain multiple copies of similar Y genes, including genes responsible for sperm generation and genes responsible for testes.
Targeted
For some reason,
genomes.
some of these genes occur in
That's because of genetic targeting. And maybe how it preserves it. What protects the chromosome is RNAs as a template.
very strange loops where the sequence seems to be inverted, or strange loops where genetic accidents can sometimes duplicate or even erase genes. In other words, its structure kind of makes very little sense. It's as if
According to
it's
story,
meant to be somewhat
you've been
fragile
told.
and somewhat easy to mutate and potentially make mistakes. It also contains an enormous amount of structures that contribute to pretty much nothing. Once again, junk DNA, where there are quite a lot of.
What about the Korean study?
Now we think it's responsible for vision, but at the same time it can technically sense magnetic field as well. And what's even more interesting, and I guess in some sense more comical, is that last year the South Korean researchers conducted an extremely interesting experiment. They essentially took a bunch of starved guys. Very unusual. Now we think it's responsible for vision, but at the same time it can technically sense magnetic field as well. And what's even more interesting, and I guess in some sense more comical, is that last year the South Korean researchers conducted an extremely interesting experiment. They essentially took a bunch of starved guys, and here we're talking about men, not women, put them in a box, rotated the box around, and had them try to orient themselves towards food. The combination of hunger, blue light, and the fact that they were male allowed them to almost always accurately pinpoint where the food was located. And that is something that's extremely unusual and very interesting. But when the light was not blue, so for example when it was red light, or when they were not starving, or when they were women, they couldn't do it. It was only for starved males in blue light, which for some reason resulted in them being able to pinpoint where the food was after all. Now there might be some explanation to sequences that actually seem to be even coming from different viruses or genes that haven't been used for millions of years. Now that's common in the X chromosome too, but particularly common in the Y chromosome. Remember, this has at least 1,000 active genes. This one here only has 27. And then, strangely enough, it also seems to have a really large chunk of glow-in-the-dark genes. Different types of structures that tend to bind fluorescent dyes. Why this is so is currently unknown. But then it also contains a somewhat pseudo-autosomal region that's sort of like a remnant from when it used to be similar to the X chromosome, and in some cases is identical to some parts of the X. So when it comes to genetics, it's almost like the Frankenstein's monster of chromosomes, but also identical to some parts of the X. So when it comes to genetics, it's almost like the Frankenstein's monster of chromosomes. It's a combination of everything all together, but also the one that seems to make the least sense. But one question that a lot of scientists are trying to answer right now
the
is
sweet sound of selling and earning on Vinted.
where is it actually?
Don't wear it,
Now,
sell it.
different independent studies on genetics, usually using multicultural samples, have already detected that as you get older, Y chromosomes tend to generally disappear. And more importantly, there is generally a sign of degradation in older bodies. And because of this, there have been actually several speculations that maybe at some point in the next 10 million years, the Y chromosome might be gone completely. Now, this is a somewhat controversial statement, and it's not really scientifically proven just yet, but it's still something worth assessing because there are definitely signs of the Y chromosome decreasing in overall size and also decreasing with age. And so the question is, can it completely disappear? And what would happen to the species then? Turns out, it's happened before, to several rodents in the last few million years. And though technically losing Y chromosome may mean the loss of sexual reproduction, it doesn't seem to be the case, at least for a well-known case of amami spiny rats. They seem to have found a way to regress back to what it used to be like approximately 150 million years ago, evolving X chromosomes into new male sex chromosomes. These rats, though kind of rare, are quite common at least on some islands in Japan, and they all seem to possess just one X chromosome inside their body, both males and females. But it wasn't always like this. Genetical studies determined that they used to have Y chromosome, but just like in mammals and just like in humans, it's basically disappeared over time. And specifically approximately 2 million years ago, certain types of duplication inside X chromosome were suddenly able to perform the same role as the Y chromosome in their ability to turn on SOX9 factor, which meant that they no longer required SRY gene that's present on the Y chromosome. As a matter of fact, it's believed that both were used by certain species, but over time, this possibly became redundant. And so it's possible that as the Y chromosome started to shrink, there was maybe a mixed population of males with and without Y that would then compete for resources. But around the same time, there was also a relatively major climate change, which
This question is asking about the true option regarding XX male syndrome.
XX male syndrome, also called de la Chapelle syndrome, for Albert de la Chapelle, who characterized it in 1972, is a rare sex chromosomal disorder. Usually, it is caused by unequal crossing over between X and Y chromosomes during meiosis in the father, which results in the X chromosome containing the normally male SRY gene. When this X combines with a normal X from the mother during fertilization, the result is an XX male. Rarer causes include mutation in an autosomal or X chromosomal gene or undetected mosaicism with a Y-bearing cell line. This syndrome occurs in approximately 4 or 5 in 100,000 individuals, making it less common than Klinefelter syndrome. Include small testes and subjects are invariably sterile. Individuals with this condition sometimes have feminine characteristics, with varying degrees of gynecomastia but with no intra-abdominal Müllerian tissue. Oklahoma Health Science Centers, most XX males are not stereotypically feminine and are typical boys and men, although other reports suggest that facial hair growth is usually poor and libido is diminished. Males typically have one X chromosome and one Y chromosome in each diploid cell of their bodies. Females typically have two X chromosomes. XX males have two X chromosomes, with one of them containing genetic material from the Y chromosome, making them phenotypically male. They are genetically female but otherwise appear to be male.
Even Y chromosome has a shrink for the male role.
Recombination, and so you would not expect any segments on the Y chromosome. And that's why I say no, but it turns out that both the X and the Y chromosomes have these tiny regions on either end called pseudoautosomal regions. And these regions actually have the capability of recombining. In other words, in men, when they're passing on their genes, the Y and the X chromosome line up together, and sometimes those pseudoautosomal regions will swap places, they'll recombine. Now, you might be wondering, can I see this ever? And really, the answer is no, and that's just because these are such small segments. So to give you an idea, the one end, par 1, pseudoautosomal region 1, is only 2.6 million bases long. Now, that may sound like a lot, but we know that on average in the human genome, a centimorgan is about 1 million bases. It's not constant throughout it, but just as a rough estimate, that's a good starting point. So this segment on the Y chromosome is only really about 2.6 centimorgans in length. And that means that it's not going to show up pretty much in any analysis, because almost every analysis uses at least 7 centimorgans, and maybe you can go down as small as 3 centimorgans on some things with GEDmatch. But for the most part, you're never going to be able to see this. Now, interestingly enough, there actually are about 16 genes within this small little segment. Now, the second pseudoautosomal region is even smaller. It's only about 300,000 base pairs long and has about 3 genes on it. And these are on either end of the Y chromosome and the X chromosome. So, no, your Y DNA is never going to have segments. And that's because these pseudoautosomal regions, while they may recombine, they're just too short to be seen on any kind of chromosome browser.
Activation. So with each chromosome, one chromosome has to be inactivated, set aside as a spare. Except for X and Y, they can be active at the same time. The proteins in effect. One set of chromosome is a spare, other is with active. Usually it's the male side that determines which set with targeting off small RNAs from its body. The X and Y can act at the same time. We have 2 Y chromosomes. Because maybe that's not the point of the Y chromosome, to not generalize. Maybe it's meant to pick up genes, pick up and transfer genes. We were in the Y chromosome was made to mutate, have more mutations, spread some to other chromosomes. Yes, like the gene could be passed down to female when they do recombine or break off. That's mostly how the Y chromosome keeps growing or maintains size by catching them jumping genes. So genes were transferred more primarily before eukaryotes in cell fusion. Might be advantageous in some climates though, like this.
Sex-linked genes. These are genes found either on the X or Y chromosomes, and they're responsible for inherited differences among males and females. Hypertrichosis pinnae oris. This refers to excessive hair growth on the outer ear, and it's an example of a Y-linked trait. What does that mean? It means the gene responsible for this condition is found only on the Y chromosome. Since only males have a Y chromosome with XY sex chromosomes, only males can inherit and show this trait. Females, on the other hand, have two X chromosomes, double X, and no Y chromosome. Because of that, they cannot inherit this gene. They cannot be affected, and they cannot be carriers. Now let's look at inheritance. If a male with hypertrichosis has children with a female, here's what happens. All of his sons will inherit his Y chromosome and will also have hypertrichosis. All of his daughters will inherit his X chromosome, not the Y. So they will not have the condition and will not be carriers. To sum it up, hypertrichosis pinnae oris is passed from
X chromosomes sometimes cause cancer or apoptosis of the.
The loss creates a mix of normal and Y deficient cells. Once the chromosome is lost in a cell, all subsequent copies lack it. Studies suggest these altered cells may proliferate faster, potentially contributing to tissue changes and disease progression. Growing evidence links Y chromosome loss to serious conditions including cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, and various cancers. Men with higher level of Y deficient cells showed increased risk of heart attack, neurodegeneration.
The Y chromosome crisis manifests exclusively in the somatic cells of the organs, without compromising the evolutionary integrity of the human lineage. The pathological epicenter of this condition is concentrated in the male geriatric demographic. This process is known as MLOY, or mosaic loss of the Y chromosome. It is the physical loss of the Y chromosome from within the cell nucleus during replication in elderly men. The chronic absence of the Y chromosome in the blood and organic tissues triggers a physiological instability, which directly increases the risk of cardiovascular failure. The lethality of this somatic failure is rooted in a biological architecture refined over 190 million years of specialization and isolation. 190 million years ago, the protosex chromosomes ceased their meiotic crossing, starting a divergent trajectory. The suppression of recombination evolved to shield the genes determining masculinity, preventing them from being accidentally transferred to the X chromosome. This isolation resulted in severe structural atrophy, leading to the loss of 95% of the genetic pool that the Y chromosome shared with its original pair. This process of recombination arrest occurred in 5 distinct stages, generating layers of divergence known as evolutionary strata. Currently, the pseudo-autosomal regions represent the only remaining points where genetic exchange between the X and Y is still mechanically possible. During meiosis, the physical pairing between these asymmetric chromosomes occurs exclusively through these telomeric ends, across multiple mammalian species simultaneously. This phylogenetic tree traces the stability of the male lineage throughout evolution. On the right, the matrix reveals the retention of regulators like SRY and ZFY, which are active in all primates. Although inoperative pseudogenes exist, this rigorous selection of regulators actively preserves cellular viability. The data confirms that the Y chromosome is not a decaying vestige, but an optimized matrix that retains only the essentials for survival. Without the benefit of traditional recombination, the Y chromosome uses an alternative method to maintain its molecular integrity against mutations. Severe double-strand DNA breaks occur naturally due to the oxidative cellular environment and mitotic wear and tear. Normally, Normally, repairing these breaks requires a homologous chromosome as a template, a resource the Y lacks in its isolated cellular environment. The biological solution is interchromosomal gene conversion, or ICGC, a repair mechanism that uses the X chromosome as a template. The process begins with a structural failure in the MSY region, creating a gap. The damaged strand aligns itself with an intact sequence from the X chromosome. The Y then reconstitutes its genes by copying this information, filling the void without a physical exchange of genetic material. The existence of 13 active conversion hotspots proves that the Y chromosome uses the X chromosome's diversity to maintain its own biological stability. Genetic repair operates precisely in the germline, which generates sperm, but this efficiency declines in common organic tissues during aging.
I could the video's going on too long, but here it is. Cartoon suppressor gene on the Y chromosome, KDM5D, and JAR Jared 1D. So say it loud.